So again, I'd be happy to come back at the end to any other questions that came out of that first report, but I'd like to move on to talk about what we've learned about the land. So as a starting point, we wanted to understand how many children there are in Cincinnati, 3- and 4-year-olds who could potentially participate in a preschool program. We did not go out and count the number of heads, but using data from the American Community Survey, this is our best estimate that there are about 9,200 3- and 4-year-olds in the city. This is in the boundaries, within the boundaries of the city, roughly evenly 3-year-old, 4-year-olds. I'm going to refer to 3s and 4s. The way I think about them really are kindergarten entry cohorts. The 4-year-olds is a group that would spend potentially a year in preschool the year before they enter kindergarten. They actually start out, some of them will start turning 5 right away, so it's really a mixture of 4s and 5s until they enter kindergarten. And the 3s are the group that would potentially spend 2 years in kindergarten. It's 2 years in preschool before kindergarten. But usually they're a mixture. If you went into any program, it'd be a mixture of 3s and 4s. So then when we look to see how those 3- and 4-year-olds are distributed by family income, this is our best estimate, looking at the proportion of children whose family income falls below 100% of poverty, then 100 to 200% of poverty, the next row, 200 to 300% of poverty, and above 300% of poverty. And just by way of reference, currently the poverty line for a family of 3 is about $20,000. For a family of 4, 2 adults, 2 children, it's about $24,000. We're going to be focusing for our modeling effort when we talk about a targeted program on children below 200% of poverty. So that's roughly for a family of 4, about $48,000. And you can see that that constitutes 67% of the 3- and 4-year-olds, the preschool-age children in the city. That's a higher rate than you will see nationally, than you will see in the state of Ohio. Cincinnati has a relatively high poverty rate, and as a result, 2/3 of children fall within that group of having family income below 200% of poverty. If you just focus on those below 100% of poverty, it's close to about half of children in this age group. Now we are making that estimate off of the American Community Survey, which gives us these figures for children 0 to 5, but we're assuming that applies roughly to the 3- and 4-year-olds as well as it does to the full range of children under age 6. So the next focus was on understanding the supply of particularly center-based programs in the city. We'll talk about it as preschool supply, but we were really looking at center-based programs that would include childcare as well as formal preschool programs that would include publicly funded programs like CPS, but also private providers. The 4C database includes all licensed providers, which if you're a center-based program, you'll be included in there. It also includes those that are licensed by both parts of the state, the Department of Education and the Department of Family Services. And so that gave us some information about just the number of providers, where they're located, but a key piece of information not in that database was the current enrollment and enrollment across different age groups. We were also interested in things like vacancies, waiting lists, whether services were provided full or part day, and also knowing something about how many children are coming outside of the city into providers in the city. Potentially be interested in the other direction as well. So in collaboration with 4C, we did conduct an online survey using that license database to try to get some of that missing information. We were relatively successful, about 40%. We actually contacted providers throughout the county. 40% of all providers in the county responded, about a 36% response rate. And so what we ended up doing with that information, since it wasn't complete information, was we looked at programs in different categories and had, in some cases, different sources of information. So in the case of Head Start CPS, we know who those are. They're funded through a particular mechanism. We could actually go directly to those agencies and get information on enrollment in particular. Same thing with parochial schools. Where those providers were in our survey, we have some information from them on other topics. Among all other providers, there's a proportion of them in the city overall. There's 174 providers in the database, including CPS and Head Start. About half of them have survey results, another half didn't. So based upon the survey results, we had their enrollment information. For the others, we used some methods to impute the missing information based upon what we knew about those that responded. So in the end, we're using this mixture of data sources to try to piece together a picture of how many providers are there in the city offering center-based programs for 3 and 4-year-olds, and what's the number of seats associated with those providers. So that's the chart I'm going to show you next.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Saying center-based, which I understand, but is this also including child care providers who also have children that are in their, I'm talking about in-home, you're shaking your head now? No, so you have that entire database, but the decision ran the study was just focused on.
And so the question is, are we including the family-based providers, which can include both those who are required to be licensed, given the nature of the number of children they're serving, but also informal family friend neighbor care. The licensed group, we have information on the numbers, but we did not include them in the survey to try to get information about enrollment. So we know something about the potential supply from that group of providers, but they were not a focus in looking particularly at the services for 3 and 4-year-olds.
One component of that is that quality has not been part of the family-based provider arena until very recently, in the last year and a half. So one of our challenges is that although many are working on it, almost none are really up to a quality setting yet. So this allowed us to at least take the center-based picture, but we continue to work with the family-based providers to also get help as well.
So what you can see here, looking again specifically at the center-based programs, we have 182 providers that we're tallying up how they're distributed across provider type, whether they're serving exclusively 3 to 5-year-olds in a preschool type setting as opposed to a child care setting, which typically includes a broader age range. And by their known quality, which we're using here, the step up to quality information, which is participation in the statewide quality rating and improvement system. And in each case, you have the number of providers and how they're distributed on the left, and on the right is the number of slots or seats that those are associated with those providers. I will say that those may be half-day slots or full-day slots, so we're not distinguishing between the two. So the bottom line here is roughly 180 providers offering about 7,700 seats. You can see that they're roughly evenly divided in terms of the number into those that you would think of as being preschool. So for example, CPS would count that category because they're not serving infants and toddlers. We're not counting their after-school services. Likewise, in terms of slots, it's slightly more, 60% are in these preschool settings. A way of thinking about it is on average, the preschool providers are somewhat larger, serving more children on average than the child care settings, specifically 3 and 4-year-olds. When we look at the quality dimension, in particular, about 60% of these providers are not participating in the rating system. So we don't have any information based upon ratings about their quality. And that represents about half of all of these slots. So quality is unknown. Then the quality rating system applies a rating from 1 star to 5 star. Typically, the 3, 4, and 5 is considered high quality. And so differentiating among those, you can see that a relatively small number of providers, roughly about 9%, are in that 3, 4, and 5 category, and they're covering about 14% of kids. CPS and Head Start are not required to be in Step Up to Quality currently. Some of them do participate. When they do, they are typically in that 3 to 5 star range. So we've assumed that we can treat the CPS and Head Start seats as being in that high quality group. So when you add them together, roughly 40%, 42% of the seats, or these slots, of the 7,700 would be considered high quality, 3 to 5 star. So that's showing you that that's the quality shortfall. In essence, there are seats, 7,700 seats, that only about 40% of them would be considered high quality. Now, it's important to note that those not in step up to quality, some of them may be 3 to 5 star programs. They have just chosen not to become part of this rating system. So in other words, they're kind of a blank. They're unknown for us in terms of their underlying quality. One question then is, how far could these seats reach in terms of thinking about 3 to 4-year-olds on the supply side now with what's available on the demand side? And here, a couple of different ways of looking at this. First of all, if you thought about 3 and 4-year-olds all universally, so we have about 9,150 of them in those two age cohorts. If we looked at all center-based seats, the 7,700, that would reach about 84% of the 3 and 4-year-olds. Typical participation rates during this age is somewhere around 80%. So what it suggests is that there's not a shortage of seats. Now there may be some difference between programs that are part day versus full day, and there may be shortages in that sense, but just in terms of where you could put children in seats, they would reach about 84% of the 3 and 4-year-olds by our estimates. However, focusing in on the quality seats, so stars 3 to 5, Head Start, and CPS, that's where you see that gap. So 36% of the 3 and 4-year-olds could be reached by a high quality program today. If we were to think about a more targeted population, so now the lower part here, look at that second column, refers to children who might be in a group that you would think about providing a free or subsidized preschool program. So the first two lines look at those children who are below 100% of poverty, then we go up to 185% of poverty, and then 300% of poverty. And in each case, what you can see is that the number of slots that are targeted for those groups, for example, Head Start is there to serve children below 100% of poverty. There's an estimated 1,600 Head Start slots, 4,300 kids would be eligible, so that's reaching about 40% of the eligible population. That's a well-known gap. Head Start's not funded to reach all eligible children. But in the city of Cincinnati, given the relatively high eligibility rate, it's an even larger gap than you might see in other areas. If we add in the CPS slots and think about only targeting those below 100% of poverty, you get closer to 50% of children could be reached. And I should say, CPS has some Head Start slots, so to the other non-Head Start slots. And then again, if you look at those Head Start and other CPS slots, those that are there to be funded, targeting the low-income population, as we move up the income scale to 185% of poverty, 300% of poverty, you can see you reach fewer and fewer, a lower and lower percentage of those potentially eligible kids. So let me talk just a little bit about the funding streams that come into the city. So one question is, how much money is there already coming into Cincinnati to support a high-quality preschool experience for 3 to 4-year-olds? So we look at 4 different funding sources. They're across the columns. Title I is a federal program. The funding comes to the school district. The school district has some flexibility about how it's used. CPS uses some Title I money to extend the Head Start dollars that fund half-day slots within the district. It is available to 3 to 5-year-old. And it's essentially, you can think of it as also targeting a similar population as Head Start. Head Start is a federal program. It funds specific slots, so a grantee is funded to serve a given number of children, ages 3 to 5. Family income generally is at poverty level or below. And so that's the combination of Head Start and Title I are used within the school district. The state of Ohio, many states in the country now are funding targeted preschool programs, in some cases universal programs. Ohio has a relatively modest state-funded preschool program in the city. It does fund specific slots. It's serving kids 4 to 5. Essentially, it's a 1-year program. Family income can go as high as 200% of poverty. And you can see that in that column. And then finally, there is a final federal funding stream administered through the state ODJFS, which is sometimes referred to as subsidized child care. This is really a funding stream that's designed to allow low-income parents who are working to access subsidized child care. There is not a focus on this being an early learning experience. It's child care in order for the parents to work. So that means it's built in a lot of flexibility. It's funded through vouchers that parents can take that funding to different types of providers, including both center-based providers, home-based providers, a family or relative who care for the child. In that case, family income can go up to 125% of poverty and eligibility. Family income can grow up to 300% before you lose eligibility altogether. Looking at these 4 funding streams, I've already mentioned that Title I is being funded through, it's funding for the public schools, so the public school slots. Head Start goes to both CPS and other non-CPS providers. Both of those are funding either part day or potentially full day. Both of them have requirements for what the program is going to deliver. They're not required, that funding stream does not require participation in Step Up to Quality. The ODE money, the EC expansion money, also can go to CPS and other centers. It is a part-day funding, it just funds a half-day slot. It does have requirements for quality, in particular that the funding can go to CPS or Star 3 and above non-CPS sites. As I mentioned, the child care subsidies, you can use those subsidies in a variety of settings for both full and part day, depending upon the family's need for care. There are no requirements that the funding be used at a particular star level, quality level. There is a requirement in terms of the provider meeting some basic requirements for background checks, for example. So, how much money comes in from these various funding streams? In the case of federal Title I and the federal Head Start monies, we group them together just here because of the ways in which those funds are blended. Together they come to about close to $17 million. Adding in the ODE expansion monies, like I said, this is a relatively small amount of funding, close to $2 million in the current year. And then this is an estimate that, don't quote me on this number today because this is one we're still trying to iron out. We've got some different, depending upon where you get the data, different numbers here. But there's a sizable amount of money in the subsidy line. But again, that's money that's there to support families in their need to work. It's not necessarily there to target high-quality preschool programs. So overall, about $37 million currently in the system, specific to 3 and 4-year-olds. And there's, again, this sort of blending of the different funding streams depending upon their sources. All right, let me talk now about the modeling. Essentially, we're using all this information coming from our understanding of the supply side and the demand side, both the number of kids, the number of providers, and their quality. And we're putting that together with estimates of what we've determined a high-quality program would cost, and then modeling various scenarios about what it would look like, how many children you could serve under different assumptions about whether a program is targeted or universal, the extent of the subsidies, who would be eligible for the subsidies, and so on.